Today we're going to go over keystroke tech tips, and what I'm going to do at this time is mute everybody that's arrived. Thank you for attending today's meeting, our Keystroke Live. And if you have any questions while we're going through the presentation, feel free to click on the chat button and send me a message. I try to take a look at that every so often. And if you need to re-ask the question a second or third time to get my attention, that maybe always can be helpful. All right, well, again, today's Wednesday, the 18th, and we're going to go over technical tips that we've kind of come up with a short list, and hopefully this will help us as keystroke resellers in the future. As always, we do Keystroke Live on Wednesdays at 10 o'clock, and let's start talking. I've got a few slides today. First couple things I wanted to go through was, since we're doing a lot of EMV and new pin pads are coming on board, I wanted to talk about the Verifone VX805. There was a change made recently in the last few months about how to get the device to prompt for a credit or a debit with a standard card, meaning a swiped card, not a chip card. To get the device, the Verifone VX805, to prompt, you do need to be on a current version of Keystroke. It's 8.00 build 27 or later. The workstations do have to run or rerun the Setup WS program. Even though the Keystroke program may work correctly, there are some DLL files and OCX files that get installed in the Windows folder that DataCap requires. And I do want to make a note of this today because it keeps coming up. There are new debit chip cards that people are receiving. These are EMV chip cards that go to your bank account, are true debit cards. At this time, Mercury does not support chip debit cards, meaning chip and pin debit cards that have the chip on them. We would like anybody to contact Mercury and kind of put the pressure on them. They say they are working on it at this time. But a lot of our customers are complaining that everyone has the new cards, and if they put it in, a chip card in, it goes through as a credit card and they get different rates. It'll be up to Mercury to enable that functionality, and we hope that's going to happen soon. So if you get if you have any questions in the field, or if your customers are complaining about that, you can call and double check with us, or if you remember hearing about it, feel free to give us a call. We'll send you in the right direction and give you either Molly or Mick's phone number, have you call them and say, what's the status of this? The second thing we wanted to just bring up in this meeting today is we have found out a way to use the VX805 over RDP, remote desktop. There was a time when Mercury and DataCap had said, no, it's not supported. And I'm going to go through a little slideshow or a little graphical presentation of how it's set up. The key is that the NetEPay program has to be run at each store location on a local area network, even though the data may reside over an RDB server. This is mostly in the case of multi-store and so forth. And I'll show you, we'll go into that in a little more detail in another minute or so. The Cayenne Genius, there's been some reports of some speed issues. We had found out and got confirmation from Cayenne that you can use in the setup of the device. This is actually on the Cayenne Genius device, and each and every device you set up its IP address, you set up its gateway, and normally you would use your own internet provider's DNS addresses, DNS1 and DNS2. They had recommended using a public DNS such as Google, which is 8.8.8.8, and there's another one that's 8.8.4.4 as the secondary. We found great success when we set up the devices to do this, because those devices, the Cayenne Genius, are really pretty much your own little internet device. They actually go through your router out to the internet and go to Cayenne, and there seems to be great success when you actually use the DNS for, in this case, Google. instead of your local internet company like CenturyLink or Quest and so forth. They also recommend flushing the DNS cache. I didn't know this was possible until recently, but this has also helped out. It's a command you run in a DOS prompt or command prompt, and it's just ipconfig /flush DNS. That actually kind of flushes the memory or the cache of what the DNS addresses are, and it gives each machine a chance to kind of reestablish a more speedy connection. I'm going to go ahead and jump a few slides and we'll come back. This is kind of a graphic I've put up for using the Verifone VX805 over remote desktop. The key ingredient to this is that each store would actually be running the NetEPay program. In this graphic here, you'll see down at the bottom left, for instance, I have Store 1, and it shows Reg1 NEP. That's the NetEPay. So at Store 1 location, you run the NetEPay program on that local area connection, and register 1, 2, and 3 all would point to the same IP address. Basically, it's stored in our auth files. That actual NetEPay at that store, even though you're running with the data over the server, the actual request goes from the registers to NetEPay right to the internet to VANF Mercury servers, gets the approvals and so forth, and then comes back with an approval. We store that in the transaction. We store that information in the RDP server, which could be at a much different location. There was some talk last month about they're providing support for RDP, but we've never gotten it to work in an environment where you actually run NetEPay on the actual server itself, the RDP server. There's also some discussion about you're not supposed to do credit cards on an RDP server. So there's talks about PCI compliance, and that's probably the reason why it doesn't work that way. So what we do, for instance, in-house here at our office, we have an RDP server. Our Long Beach office can remote into it and do credit cards. And what it does here is we have a Windows 10 machine, which we keep up to date, keep up on Windows updates and so forth, and have antivirus and firewalls all set up correctly. Oops, I think I hit the page down button. And so all the requests actually go to that Windows 10 machine off to the internet. Even though the data is stored on a different server, we keep our data in a different place. So that does work. Keep that in mind. Every authorization method, you're going to have a different one. For instance, if you're running off an RDP server, for instance, Store 1 wouldn't use the standard Merky MV file. It would be something similar to what I wrote here, store1.aut, an authorization file. If you have any questions on this, feel free to give me a call. It seems like it's working just great. We've tested it with both serial and the USB devices, and it seems like the USB devices work fine in this configuration. Where in the past, other devices like the ISC250 would have to be actual true serial devices because you're sharing the serial port, but we seem to have gotten it to work with the USB devices also, so hopefully that might work for you. You might want to stick with the serial devices anyhow. So that's kind of our tech tip on RDP using the VX805, and we think it's going to be very similar with the ISC250. For those of you that are wanting to know the status as of today, there really is no status yet. We're still testing the devices, trying to get working devices from JRs and from Mercury VANF. So that's coming soon, but we really don't have a true status report on when the ISC250 would be available to be used with credit cards. I wanted to spend a few minutes today to talk about two things that have come up with our customers. One is a slowdown issue and also file locking issues. In previous versions of Keystroke version 8, we would log different credit card transactions, from everything from the status of the device to what the current um, transaction is, whether it's been approved, not approved, and so forth. And the size of these log files has gotten rather large, meaning, for instance, in the Cayenne Genius, for one transaction, it talks back and forth to Keystroke so often that there could be as many as 20 to 30 entries in the log file per transaction. So you can imagine that after 200 transactions, the log file can be very large. We've seen them at sizes of 20 and 30 megabytes and so forth. I didn't write this down, but I should have. In Keystroke 8.0 build 28 or above, I believe is the build, we actually take care of these log files for you. So when it gets to be 4 megabytes in size, the file is renamed, and then the last, I think it's half a megabyte of data is put into the current log file, and then it moves forward. We're trying to keep these log files turned on all the time for the sake of debugging any problems that people might have. But we also don't want them to get so large that the computer is spending all the time opening and closing this, and especially with multiple lanes, you have multiple people writing into these log files all at the same time. And there is a way to turn it off. It's called test mode equals 0 on the Keystroke command line. If you'd like to try that, that's fine. If you have a problem with credit cards, we may not be able to look at the log to see any of the problems. So call us if you decide to do that. We can turn it on for a period of time. In reality, we're going to be turning off the logging for a period of time to see if it makes anything faster. Myself and others in the office don't recommend using that affinity switch anymore on the command line. We haven't seen any great improvements of the speed of Keystroke. We have found that, for instance, with poll displays, if we can confirm that the poll display is actually causing a slowdown, we have different ways to kind of address that with the actual poll display settings. So we found that the affinity switch was not buying us too much. For those of you that don't know, the affinity option is a way to tell Windows what processor to use for any program. So you would tell the Windows operating system to use, let's say, CPU number 0 or the first CPU for Keystroke, and don't switch back and forth and try to multitask or multi-thread within the processor scheme. We haven't seen a big boost in speed with this. If you think differently, please call me, let me know. But I want to kind of say I think it's best to kind of take that out of the equation and just run the computer with all its CPUs all the time. And if you still see a slowdown, we'll kind of address it device by device. I do want to show you a setting in Keystroke. This came up not too long ago. I'm going to bounce over here to Keystroke. And this has to do with one of the features of Keystroke, and I think it's turned on by default. I'm pretty certain it is. It's in Sales Manager. What it does is it allows Keystroke to actually load the history of a certain customer. So as I pull up a customer, I can click on Show History, and this will bounce out and show you a report of all the invoices. This works great in our sample tutor data, but people that have lots of transactions, or if they use, let's say, the customer called number 1 walk-in instead of 0 for cash, what you end up getting is the program will try to load up to a year's worth of transactions in its memory before you scan the first line item. And it's doing that in a fashion to kind of help you load the information so you can see what's going on. And as a matter of fact, down here at the bottom here, I've just clicked on the lower left, the detail box. This is the customer's history. I've picked a customer, but it could be just as simple as a walk-in, customer number 1, for instance. Well, that's going to load up to a year's worth of transactions so you could view this small little list here. It also is used for other neat purposes, which is, let's say you want to start a quote for a customer. It'll tell you if there's an existing quote for a customer, or there's an existing on hold, or if that line item is already on a quote for that customer back 3 months ago. So it kind of helps you find information, but we found out recently that for most people, let's say in a convenience store or liquor store environment that don't use this function, you want to make sure it's turned off. So let me show you where we store this. In Sales Manager under Transaction and then Parameters, under the entry box, or the entry option under the menu, we have the customer entry here. So if I click on it, you'll see this is our sample data, and you'll see at the bottom here it says Auto Load Customer History. That little checkbox being checked will determine if it's going to load data, and it's all based on some other settings I'll show you here shortly on how far back to go. So we recommend turning this off for, let's say, a convenience store, liquor store that does many sales transactions. If you like the feature, that's great. You may not want to go back a full year, which could span many megabytes worth of data. It could be, let's say, 5 transaction files at 40 megabytes each. So it's got to load 200 megabytes worth of data before you scan the first item. It causes kind of a slowdown. So we would uncheck this box at the bottom left. We would save this. If you do want to use the feature and you like it a lot, we'd leave this checked, but then we would go take a look in Configuration Manager on some other settings. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to Configuration Manager, and this is going to be under the Settings menu for Sales Transaction Types. I'm going to look at Sales Invoice here and see if it's turned on, and I believe it's not there. Here it is right here. So I'm sorry, that was under the Entry option. Under for Sales Invoice, every transaction type you can turn on or off. So most of the time you wouldn't want sales invoices to be pulled up, but you might want to have it go check the last 3 months on quotes. So let's take a look at this setting for sales invoices. And here down at the bottom, we've used a variable that says start date -1y. That's telling Keystroke when I pull up a customer to go back 1 year of history, and basically this is a start date through today's date. That date on the right is not what it's representing. You could tell it to go back to 1/1 of 2010 if you wanted to. But this is where you can turn on different parameters and tell it, hey, there's already a sales invoice for this customer, and I want to load all the line item history. So it might go back up to, in this case, a year, look at every line item that's ever been sold to this customer, and then warn you if it sees that on an invoice before. Great feature. Some people like it. For instance, if you're selling serialized items or furniture or something like that, or you do a lot of quotes and you want to make sure people aren't duplicating effort by recreating a quote when one already exists. You may not want this turned on for sales invoices. So the idea here would be either turn some things off, for instance, like this. Maybe go back not so far. So you might go back, let's say 30 days. That's a variable there, minus 30D. You might want to go back 2 or 3 months. So this is going to pull up 3 months worth of data for sales invoices. A lot of times you wouldn't do this at all. You would blank out that date and turn this off for sales invoices. I'm going to say OK to this and OK again. But maybe on quotes I want to have it work for me, and I want it to go, this 0 means from the beginning of time, but maybe I do want to go back 1 year, and I do want to be warned if there's an existing quote that has the same line item on it. So the idea here, to kind of speed things up, if you see a lag or delay while scanning line items, you may want to see that this has been turned off. And you can do this for every transaction type. This is a quote I'm working on here. We could do it for layaways if you use layaways. You can do it for on holds if you do on holds. But I kind of recommend you don't want it turned on for sales invoices, especially if you have lots of volume. It just takes a lot longer. All right, so that was, we were just talking there about Slowdown issues. Turn off the auto load customer history. Oops, I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong box. Okay. So you can turn off the auto load customer history, or at least change the time frame. If you need help with that, or you kind of remember it exists, give us a call and so forth. The last part of our discussion here today is pretty much about file locking. People have called us and sent error logs to us that show different transaction files or different files being locked. I'll just tell you a little backstory here about the keystroke data. We have one file, it's called kstrhdr.dat. It's kind of, I call it the gatekeeper, meaning when I decide to save a transaction in Keystroke, I would go ahead and, let's say I'm already at the point of hitting the save button, or sometimes when you hit a print button, what it does is it locks that file, the kstrhdr.dat. Then it goes and updates other files. So it'll update the customer's record with the last purchase date. It might update the customer's amount due field. It'll go to every inventory item that's on that transaction and change its quantity on hand, last sold dates, total sold amounts. It might go in and try to capture a invoice number, send it to a printer. Then it will go ahead and save the transaction in one of the files, like kstr0001.dat, for instance. When all is good and well, it releases that file so that another computer, if they are going to save a transaction at a similar time frame, it would actually stop and say, wait a second, somebody has locked that gatekeeper file, and it's going to go through and make sure that happens correctly, and then when it releases that file, the next transaction will be saved. It's done this way on purpose. It's been doing this for many, many, many years. There's a delay so that the end user, the customer, doesn't see that file is locked if it's within, let's say, 3 or 4 seconds. After 3 or 4 seconds, it starts showing it on the screen that the file is locked. It starts telling other computers that are trying to do similar stuff, let's say change the inventory record or do a purchase transaction while a sale is being done. So it hides that or kind of buffers it for 3 or 4 seconds, and then if there's a problem with it, it's usually the machine that is not seeing the error message causing the problem. For instance, I'm at my machine and I save a transaction and my printer is out of paper and it pops up and says error 75 or something, cannot print, check your device and so forth, or the cash drawer won't open. So as that person is sitting there putting a new roll of paper into the printer, and the error is on the screen in Keystroke, that file is locked and other people start seeing the KSTR HDR file being locked. So it's not really the people seeing the message that have a problem, it's the person that has a true error message that they're trying to resolve. I'll just go to the bottom of this page here. It's best to reboot a failing machine. Don't sit there and go, oh, I'm out of paper, let me turn the monitor off and walk away. That'll just cascade everybody into having an error message. Don't just turn that computer off. Don't just kill Keystroke and turn it off. That leaves the file in a locked state on the server. You would, if it was a true error that you couldn't get out of with Keystroke, or a networking error, let's say you lost connection, you would actually have to reboot the machine. If you reboot the machine, we've all seen this, when it pops up it says restoring network connections. That's what you see when you boot up your computer. That's saying, here's all my network connections, I don't have any files open. That's the time it's going to release the file that's truly locked. But let's talk about file locking. I wrote on here, use a different Windows username, because there's a tool that you can use if you're really having a chronic problem with file locking, and that's computer management under open files. Let me pull this up here. Control panel, right there we go. Switch slides. So I've opened up Control Panel and I've clicked on Administrative Tools. In Administrative Tools, there's Computer Management. I'm going to open this up. This isn't a very good example. This machine I'm working on today is not really a server, so it's not going to show you as much fun information as if you were sitting in front. Here's computer management, found again under administrative tools. You can open up shared folders and you can look at open files. When I click this, you'll see there's nothing on my list. If you were sitting at a true server machine, you would see a lot of open files in Keystroke. Keystroke opens hundreds of files, sometimes dozens and dozens, depending on the types of machines you're on and how many people are on that network. You would go under open files. You would see the list. You would find the file called KSTRHDR. And the accessed by, this is kind of the important part, it's going to be the actual Windows username. It's not the computer name. It's not, so as on this machine I'm doing this presentation, we have a user called KS Live, and we have another one called, I think, David on this. Those are two different unique names. I can actually open up Keystroke on this machine. Under KS Live, I could switch users over to David. I can open up Keystroke again on another machine, get an error message, then log off of that machine and go back over to KS Live. So one machine can have multiple users. It's the old login or switching of users, the fast switching that some people use. We found out a lot of our dealers like to set up usernames like POS or Keystroke. So you might have 12 machines all logged in with the same name called POS. This list would be very long, all with the same name. You would never know who's locking the file. This is a great tool if you have a chronic problem. We want to make sure your Windows usernames are different. So you can call it POS1, POS2, POS3 if you want as a Windows user login name. And you would go from there, or you can call it Mike, Bill, Sam, and Tom. So the idea here is that this is a great tool to go find the actual locked file, and you'll be surprised when you find out who's locking that file and you go over to that machine. They've either gone to lunch with an error message on their screen, they've turned off the monitor, they've turned off the computer. Again, rebooting the computer, which would be a workstation, would solve it, or resolving the issue in Windows, whether it's a printer issue and so forth. You might also find that the computer has gone to sleep and has reverted back to the Windows login screen, waiting for them to log back in. That can actually lock some files, we found out too. One last thing about file locking. I did not bring this up. I actually didn't write it down. There are other files we lock and open and close continuously through the program. Those are the user files, like users with an S, or user 1, user 2, user 3. Those are temporary files. It's a way Keystroke counts concurrent users. We found that on some operating systems, as you auto log off and then the computer goes to sleep, that the user files can get locked. We again can use computer management like I had shown you before to find out who's locking that file. We have a startup switch. I'm sorry I didn't write it on here. It's called users log equals 1. You could put that on all the machines. It'll start creating a file called users log or users.log. And what it does is then it actually says this machine, Keystroke machine number 13, is open the file, and then it closed the file, and it opened the file and then closed the file. So if you start seeing issues about users.log, users.tmp or user1.tmp is locked, give us a call. We'll put that startup switch in, users log equals 1, and we'll run it for a period of time. And we'll see what machine or machines seem to be locking that file. So there's really only two locking of files you should see, kstrhdr.dat and users.tmp or user1.tmp. Those are locked on purpose. If you see any other files like ksinv, that's the inventory, or kscst, or a transaction file, kstr0045.dat, that should never happen. That's a problem with your network. The network is actually reporting a file being not locked when in fact it truly is locked. Because of our gatekeeper idea, you should never see any files except for those few files I mentioned. Well, great. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I'm going to unmute everybody and see if there's any questions you might have for me. So if you have any questions, let me know, and if not, that's great. Well, very good. We also have recorded this session, so you can always review it later on our Keystroke Live YouTube videos. And next week, you get to hear David Hunsinger. He's going to be talking about the summarize history function within Keystroke. All right, thank you very much. I'll go ahead and end the meeting. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call.